The ETF that you might want to consider for the long term is the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF with ticker symbol VOO. This ETF basically follows the S&P 500 Index. The S&P 500 represents 500 largest companies on the US stock market. So when you put your money into VOO, you are investing in those top 500 companies. This is a market capitalization weighted index, which means bigger the company, the more weight it carries in the index. In fact, the top 10 companies together make up about 30% of the whole index. Now, S&P 500 rebalances every 3 months, which means the index adjusts every 3 months based on how much the company is worth at that time. Now let us talk about the returns you can make from VOO. If you look at the numbers, over the past 10 years, VOO has given about 12.5% in returns. So if you had invested $10,000 in VOO back in 2014, by 2024, it would have grown to roughly $32,000. But if you stretch the timeline to over 50 years, then S&P 500 has been giving about 10.5% in compounded returns if you reinvested the dividends in the index. Now here's an interesting fact. Over 20 years or more, a whopping 95% of mutual funds managed by professional investors fail to beat this index. So if you stick with VOO for 20 years or longer, chances are you'll do better than most of the big short fund managers. Now let us talk about cost. How much it costs to own a fund can really affect how much money you make in the long run. Luckily, VOO is super low cost. It has what's called an expense ratio of only 0.03%. That means for every $10,000 that you invest, you would only be paying $3 annually to Vanguard. Now compare that to mutual funds. They can hit you with the fees as high as 1% or even more for managing your money. Over a really long time, like 20 or 30 years, those fees can add up to a really big amount. Alright, let's dive into dividend yield. As of now, the dividend yield for VOO is around 1.39%. That means for every $10,000 that you invest in VOO, you would get about $139 back in dividends. Over the past 20 years or so, the dividend yield for S&P 500 has usually been between 1 and 2%. So you can expect to receive anywhere between 1 and 2% in dividends from your investments in VOO.